The bank teller wouldn't look me in the eye. She kept clicking her mouse, lips pressed together, like if she stared at the screen long enough, the numbers might change on their own. My fingers tightened around the edge of the counter, knuckles pale, heart thudding so loud I was sure she could hear it. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she finally said. "There's nothing left in the account." Nothing. I laughed at first, a sharp, broken sound that didn't belong to me. "That's not possible," I said. "My husband and I just deposited—" She turned the monitor slightly so I could see it myself. Zeros. Across every account. Savings, emergency fund, the college account we'd started for our kids when they were still in diapers. All gone. I felt the room tilt. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, too bright, too cruel. My phone was already in my hand before I realized I'd grabbed it, my thumb stabbing at his name like force could summon him back into existence. Straight to voicemail. Again. And again. By the time I walked out of the bank, my hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before I could unlock the car. I sat there in the driver's seat, staring at the steering wheel, trying to make sense of what my body already knew, but my mind refused to accept. My husband was gone. Not late, not stuck in traffic, not ignoring my calls after an argument. Gone. When I got home, the silence confirmed it. His shoes were missing from the hallway, his dresser drawers yanked open and emptied, the fireproof lockbox under our bed, the one he insisted only he had the combination to, was gone too. I stood in the middle of our bedroom, surrounded by the ghost of a life I thought was real. The kids came home from school an hour later, backpacks thudding to the floor, voices filling the space he'd left behind. "Where's Daddy?" my daughter asked. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. That night, after they fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with overdue notices spread out in front of me like a cruel joke. Mortgage, utilities, credit cards I didn't even remember opening. I finally found it then. The email. Short, cold, carefully worded. "Tanya, I need space. I've done what I had to do. Don't try to find me." No apology. No explanation. No concern for the 2 children sleeping down the hall. Just disappearance. I slid down against the cabinet and cried so hard my ribs hurt. Not just for the money, not even just for the betrayal, but for how completely he had erased us. 3 weeks later, the eviction notice arrived. I remember standing at the door, paper shaking in my hand. The neighbors' curtains twitched. People always notice when a woman starts falling apart. That night, I sold my wedding ring. It felt heavier than it should have been when I placed it on the counter. The jeweler barely glanced at it before naming a price that insulted 10 years of my life. I took the cash anyway. Survival doesn't negotiate with pride. I picked up overnight cleaning shifts downtown, scrubbing offices that smelled of success I no longer believed in. When the babysitter fell through, I slept in my car with the kids wrapped in coats and blankets, whispering stories to keep them calm while my anger burned hot and silent in my chest. Every night, I asked myself the same question. What does a man vanish so completely and expect the woman he left behind to disappear with him? What he didn't know was that I was watching, listening, remembering, and one day soon I would stop surviving and start hunting for the truth. The first thing poverty steals isn't comfort, it's dignity. I learned that fast. Every morning I woke up before the sun, careful not to disturb the kids as they slept curled together in the back seat of the car. Condensation fogged the windows, turning our breaths into clouds. I'd wipe a small circle clear with my sleeve just to remind myself the world was still out there, still moving, even if we were stuck. I washed up in gas station bathrooms, splashing cold water on my face, fixing my hair in cracked mirrors while pretending not to notice the looks. People can sense desperation. It makes them uncomfortable, easier to look away than acknowledge how close they might be to the same edge. I dropped the kids at school with forced smiles and promises I prayed I could keep. "Mama's got it," I told them, over and over, until the words felt like lies. By nightfall, I put on gloves and cleaned offices downtown. I scrubbed glass walls overlooking the city, watching lights flicker in buildings where people planned futures I no longer recognized. I emptied trash cans filled with catered lunches and broken pens, wondering how someone could throw away so much without a second thought. Anger followed me everywhere. Not loud anger, the dangerous kind, the kind that sits in your chest and waits. Some nights, when exhaustion finally loosened its grip, memories slipped in. Small things, how he always handled the money, how he insisted I didn't need access to certain accounts because it was easier if one person managed it. How he'd smile and say, "Trust me," like trust was something you owed just because you loved someone. I trusted him, and he took everything. The eviction became official before I could stop it. I packed what little we had left into storage bins, labeling them with shaking hands. Clothes, toys, documents I prayed I'd never need. The kids thought we were going on an adventure. I let them believe it. Hope is sometimes the only inheritance a mother can give. One night, while scrolling on my phone after a long shift, I saw his face. Not on my screen, on hers. A woman I didn't know had posted a photo tagged at a restaurant I couldn't afford anymore. There he was, laughing, arm around her waist, wine glasses catching the light. He looked rested, comfortable, alive in a way he hadn't been with me for years. The caption burned itself into my memory. "New beginnings." My hands went cold. I clicked her profile, then another photo, then another. Vacation shots, new clothes, inside jokes in the comments. A life funded by the money I'd worked for, the money meant to keep our children safe. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I saved everything. Screenshots, dates, locations, comments he'd liked under his real name, careless and confident. That night I sat in the driver's seat long after the kids fell asleep, phone glowing in the dark, something sharp and steady taking shape inside me. He thought disappearing meant erasing himself. He thought leaving me desperate meant leaving me powerless. But desperation does something dangerous to a woman who's already lost everything. It strips away fear. The next morning I made calls, quiet ones. Legal aid, a women's advocacy group, a former coworker who owed me a favor. I asked questions I'd never thought to ask before, about abandoned spouses, about asset tracing, about what happens when someone thinks they can run forever. For the first time since he vanished, I felt something shift. Control. Because while he was out there spending what he stole, I was learning how to take it back. And the deeper I dug, the more I realized he hadn't been as careful as he thought, not even close. The truth started revealing itself in fragments. A name here, an address there, a trail of careless decisions made by a man who believed desperation would keep me quiet. During the day, I moved like a ghost, school drop-offs, borrowed showers, counting dollars before deciding whether gas or groceries mattered more. But at night, after the kids were asleep, I became someone else. Focused, methodical, relentless. Legal aid helped me file the first report, spousal abandonment. Not glamorous, not fast, but it put his disappearance on record. The woman on the phone spoke gently, like she'd heard this story too many times before. "You're not the first," she said, "but you don't have to be invisible." That sentence stayed with me. I started pulling credit reports, mine first, then his. accounts I'd never authorized, loans opened months before he vanished, a slow bleed I hadn't noticed because I was busy holding our family together. That's when I realized this wasn't impulse. It was premeditated. Every transfer had been planned, every withdrawal timed. He hadn't just left, he'd prepared to land softly while we fell hard. The woman from the photos had a name, so did the apartment complex tagged in her posts. I didn't show up, I didn't message her, I wasn't looking for confrontation. I was looking for leverage. I tracked public records during lunch breaks at the library, marriage licenses, business registrations, a small consulting LLC in his name registered 2 weeks before he disappeared, addressed to her apartment. Sloppy. Men like him always underestimate the women they leave behind. One night, while cleaning an executive office, I found something that felt like fate. A man's jacket draped over a chair. His phone buzzed on the desk. I didn't touch it, but the email preview flashed across the screen. Unauthorized fund transfer flagged. My breath caught. That was when it hit me how many men like him sat in offices just like this, convinced no one would ever trace their footprints, convinced money erased accountability. I finished my shift with shaking hands. The next day, I filed a report with the bank's fraud department. Not emotional, not accusatory, just facts, dates, amounts, accounts, screenshots. They took me seriously. That mattered more than I expected. Weeks passed, winter deepened. We bounced between couches and borrowed rooms. Some nights I cried quietly in the bathroom so the kids wouldn't hear. Other nights I sat in silence, staring at my phone, waiting. Then the call came. "We've located assets connected to your husband," the investigator said, "and we believe there may be grounds for recovery." I sank into a chair, the world spinning. "How much?" I whispered. "Enough," she replied, "but this won't stay private." I smiled for the first time in months. Good, because privacy is what let him run. The settlement process moved slowly, painfully. He fought it at first, denied intent, claimed misunderstandings, painted me as unstable. I expected that. Men who steal always claim confusion when they're caught. But the evidence stacked up. And then came the hearing. He didn't look like the man I married. He looked smaller, thinner, angry. He didn't look at the kids. He barely looked at me. When the judge asked why he drained joint accounts and disappeared without support, his silence said more than any excuse could have. The ruling came weeks later. Partial recovery, back pay, legal accountability. It wasn't everything he took, but it was enough to stand up again. I signed the settlement with steady hands, not because I forgave him, but because I was done letting him define the ending. The first thing I did wasn't buy furniture, wasn't celebrate. I rented a small apartment, safe, warm, ours. That first night, the kids slept in real beds again. I sat on the floor between them, tears streaming down my face. Not from pain, but from relief. I hadn't disappeared. I had survived. And as I turned off the lights, I knew something deep in my bones. This wasn't just about getting money back. It was about proving that betrayal doesn't erase a woman, it sharpens her. And soon, I would make sure he understood that completely. The apartment smelled like fresh paint and second chances. It wasn't much, 2 small bedrooms, a kitchen barely wide enough for 2 people to pass each other, and windows that rattled when the wind picked up. But it was ours. The kids ran from room to room that first day, laughing like they'd been released from something invisible. I watched them and made myself a promise. No matter what came next, they would never feel disposable again. The settlement money didn't erase the damage. It didn't magically restore trust or rewind the months we spent surviving on fumes, but it gave me space, breathing room, time to think beyond tomorrow. That's when the letters started coming. Not bills, apologies. Friends who hadn't checked in, family members who suddenly didn't know the full story, people who'd heard whispers after the hearing made its way through the community. I didn't respond to most of them. Healing doesn't require an audience. What I did respond to was opportunity. A legal advocate connected me with a workforce program for displaced women. They helped me update my resume, something I hadn't done in years because my husband had always insisted his income was enough. I took classes at night after the kids were asleep, learning skills I never thought I'd need. Turns out, I was good at it. Really good. Meanwhile, he unraveled quietly. I didn't stalk him. I didn't need to. News has a way of traveling when someone falls from comfort. His new relationship cracked under pressure once the money slowed. The woman who smiled in vacation photos stopped posting altogether. I felt no joy in that, just confirmation. One afternoon, as I picked the kids up from school, a car I recognized pulled into the lot behind me. My stomach tightened. He stepped out slowly, hands in his pockets like he didn't know what to do with him anymore. He looked tired, older. The confidence that once filled a room had drained out of him. "Tanya," he said softly, like we were still on familiar terms. I didn't answer right away. "You didn't have to go that far," he added. "We could have worked something out." I laughed then, not cruelly, but honestly. "You left us with nothing. You don't get to decide what too far looks like." He glanced toward the school doors. "I just wanted a fresh start." "So did I," I replied. "The difference is I didn't steal one." The kids came out then, backpacks bouncing, smiles wide when they saw me. He stepped back instinctively, like he knew his place had already been erased. As we drove away, my hands were steady on the wheel. I felt something I hadn't expected. Closure. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat at the small kitchen table and opened my laptop. I registered a new email, a new name. Not to hide, to build. I wasn't the woman who slept in her car anymore. I wasn't the woman begging for answers. I was the woman who survived abandonment, traced the truth, and stood back up without permission. And as I closed the laptop and turned off the light, I realized he had taken our savings, but he had given me something far more dangerous in return: independence. And I was just beginning to understand what I could do with it. Independence feels strange at first. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or applause. It creeps in quietly, showing up in small moments, like realizing I could buy groceries without checking my balance 10 times, or choosing cereal my kids liked instead of the cheapest box on the shelf. Those moments mattered more than anything flashy ever could. I started the new job 2 weeks later. Nothing glamorous, administrative support for a logistics firm downtown, but it came with steady hours, benefits, and something I hadn't felt in a long time: respect. My supervisor didn't talk down to me. She didn't question my intelligence. She didn't assume motherhood made me less capable. Every evening, I came home tired but proud. The kids adjusted fast. Kids always do when love is consistent. They made friends in the apartment complex. They argued over whose turn it was to wash dishes. They stopped asking when Daddy was coming back. That question faded on its own. What didn't fade was the anger. It didn't control me anymore, but it stayed close, like a reminder, not of what he did, but of what I survived. I channeled it into focus. I kept learning, took extra certifications offered through work, volunteered for projects no one else wanted. People noticed. One afternoon, my supervisor called me into her office. "You've been through a lot," she said carefully, "but you don't work like someone trying to catch up. You work like someone building something." I swallowed hard. She slid a folder across the desk. Inside was an offer, more responsibility, more pay, a path forward I hadn't dared to imagine a year ago. I accepted without hesitation. That night, after the kids fell asleep, I sat on the couch and let myself feel it. Not victory, validation. I had rebuilt from ashes, brick by brick, without begging anyone to stay or save me. Then my phone buzzed, a message from a number I hadn't saved but knew by heart. I made a mistake. I stared at the screen for a long time. Can we talk? I thought about the woman I was when he disappeared, the woman who cried in parking lots, who scrubbed floors at night, who slept sitting up in a car so her children could lie down. I typed back one sentence. There's nothing left to say. I blocked the number. Peace doesn't come from winning arguments with the people who hurt you. It comes from realizing you no longer need them to understand anything at all. As I turned off the lights, I caught my reflection in the dark window. I looked older, stronger, more real. I smiled, because the woman staring back at me wasn't defined by abandonment anymore. She was defined by what she built after it. And the best part? This story wasn't over yet. It was just getting good. Success has a way of testing people who thought you'd stay broken. The promotion changed more than my paycheck. It changed how people looked at me. Suddenly, I wasn't the woman who went through something. I was the woman who got things done, who stayed late without complaining, who solved problems before they became emergencies. I carried that same discipline home. I set routines. Mornings became predictable. Evenings were calmer. Homework at the table, dinner together, laughter returning in pieces. Our apartment started to feel less temporary, more like a place we were choosing, not settling for. Still, there were nights when the past knocked softly. I'd wake up just before dawn, heart racing, convinced I'd missed something, another bill, another threat, another shoe about to drop. Trauma doesn't disappear just because life improves. It lingers, waiting to see if the ground is truly stable. One evening, as I sorted mail, I found an envelope with a return address I didn't recognize. Inside was a notice. My stomach tightened as I read it. He was contesting part of the settlement, claiming new circumstances, claiming hardship, claiming I'd been unfairly aggressive. I laughed out loud, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Aggressive. That's what they call women who refuse to stay quiet. I called my legal advocate the next morning. She wasn't surprised. They do this when they feel control slipping, she said, but he doesn't have leverage. I looked around my office at work later that day, sunlight pouring through the windows, coworkers greeting me by name. Control had already slipped. Still, the process dragged on. Paperwork, delays, petty maneuvers meant to exhaust me into compliance. He was betting on my past version, the one who would panic, apologize, compromise. He didn't know that woman no longer existed. Then something unexpected happened. The other woman reached out. Her message was short. I didn't know everything. I'm sorry. I stared at the screen, emotions colliding, anger, vindication, exhaustion. She wasn't the enemy. She'd been part of the lie, yes, but also deceived by the same man who thought he could outrun consequences. I didn't reply. Some apologies are meant for the person giving them, not the one receiving them. Weeks later, the challenge was dismissed. Again, final this time. I framed nothing, celebrated quietly, took the kids out for pizza and let them pick dessert. We laughed over sticky fingers and bad jokes, the kind of normal that once felt unreachable. That night, as I tucked them into bed, my son wrapped his arms around my neck. "You're strong, Mama," he said sleepily. I held him a little tighter than usual. Strength. It hadn't looked like what I imagined. It looked like endurance, like paperwork, like standing up again after everyone assumed you wouldn't. As I turned off the hallway light that night, my phone buzzed one last time. An email from my supervisor. Subject line, "New opportunity." I opened it slowly, heart pounding, not with fear, but anticipation. Because just when I thought I'd finished proving I could survive, life was offering me the chance to rise even higher. And I knew the next decision I made would change everything. I read the email 3 times before it fully settled in. New opportunity. Those words used to terrify me. Opportunity meant risk, meant stepping into the unknown without guarantees. But that night, sitting at the small kitchen table while the kids slept down the hall, it felt different. It felt earned. The offer was simple on paper. Lead coordinator for a new regional project. More responsibility, more visibility. A salary that would have sounded impossible a year ago when I was counting quarters for gas and praying my car would start. I closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I thought about the version of me who scrubbed office floors at midnight, who whispered bedtime stories in a parked car so her kids wouldn't hear her cry. I thought about how close I'd come to believing that was all my life would ever be. Then I accepted the offer. The next months moved fast. Meetings replaced cleaning shifts, calendars filled. My name started appearing on emails that mattered. I wore confidence the way I once wore exhaustion, naturally, without thinking about it. And still, he lingered like a shadow that refused to fade. I didn't see him, I didn't hear from him, but every now and then I felt his presence in the way people lowered their voices when they mentioned his name, or the way mutual acquaintances avoided eye contact. One afternoon, my manager pulled me aside. "I want you to know," she said, "your background check came back spotless. The finance team was impressed with how clean everything is." I smiled politely, but inside, something twisted. He tried to smear me, tried to paint himself as the victim, and it hadn't worked. That evening, while walking the kids home from the park, my phone rang. Unknown number. I stopped, heart thudding, and answered. "Tanya," his voice said. I froze. "I just wanted to hear your voice," he continued, softer now. "I heard you're doing well." The audacity took my breath away. "I'm busy," I replied flatly. "I know I hurt you. I know I messed up, but you don't have to keep punishing me." I laughed then, a short, humorless sound. "I'm not punishing you. I'm living." Silence stretched between us. "You don't recognize me anymore," he finally said. "That's the point," I answered, and hung up. My hands shook for a few seconds afterward, not from fear, but from the realization that his voice no longer had power over me. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat on the balcony of our apartment, city lights blinking in the distance. I thought about how much I'd lost and how much more I'd gained by being forced to rebuild from nothing. He had taken our savings, he had taken our comfort, he had taken the illusion of safety. But he hadn't taken my ability to adapt, to learn, to rise. And as the cool night air wrapped around me, I realized something important. The man who disappeared with our money had also disappeared from my future, completely. What lay ahead wasn't shaped by what he stole. It was shaped by what I chose next. And soon, I would make a choice that ensured my children would never again be at the mercy of someone else's betrayal. Not ever again. Security became my new obsession. Not the anxious, panicked kind, the intentional kind. The kind that comes from understanding exactly how fragile life can be when you place it in the wrong hands. I started small. Emergency savings, automatic transfers, passwords no one else knew. I taught the kids simple things too, how to memorize my phone number, where important papers were kept, what to do if something ever felt wrong. They didn't ask why. Children trust preparation when it's wrapped in calm. Work intensified as the regional project picked up momentum. I traveled occasionally now, short trips, but enough to remind me how far I'd come from sleeping in my car. Hotels still made me uneasy. Something about being away from my kids tightened my chest. Trauma doesn't disappear just because your circumstances change. It waits. One night, while reviewing documents in my hotel room, an email popped up that made my breath hitch. From Legal Services. Subject, Asset Disclosure Update. I opened it slowly. They'd found more. Not millions, but enough to matter. An offshore account he'd failed to declare. Money hidden under a shell company name I almost didn't recognize. Almost. It was the same nickname he used for our son. My hands trembled, not with hope, but fury. Even in theft, he had used us. I forwarded the email to my attorney and shut my laptop hard enough to make the lamp rattle. I paced the room, every step burning with the urge to confront him, to demand answers he'd never honestly give. Instead, I breathed. Revenge is loud. Justice is patient. Weeks later, the final settlement adjustment came through. The funds were released directly to me. No conversation, no contact, no room for manipulation. I sat at my desk staring at the confirmation screen until the numbers stopped feeling surreal. I didn't tell the kids right away. Money wasn't the victory. Stability was. The next morning, I took them to breakfast before school. Pancakes, bacon, laughter sticky with syrup. Ordinary happiness, the kind I once thought was gone forever. As I dropped them off, my daughter hugged me tight. "Are we okay now?" she asked quietly. I crouched down, meeting her eyes. "We've done okay," I said gently. "But yes, we're safe." That afternoon, my phone buzzed with another unknown number. I didn't answer. Then another message arrived. "Please, I need to explain." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering. For a split second, curiosity tempted me. Closure is a lie we tell ourselves when we want to reopen doors that should stay shut. I deleted the message. That night, while the kids slept, I opened a folder on my laptop labeled Future. Inside were plans, real ones, a better apartment, college savings, a long-term goal I hadn't said out loud yet. Ownership, something with my name on it alone. As I closed the laptop, a thought settled in my chest, heavy but steady. He disappeared with our savings because he thought money was power. He was wrong. Power is knowing you can be stripped down to nothing and still rebuild a life no one can take from you again. And the next step I was about to take would make that truth permanent. Because soon I wouldn't just be surviving betrayal. I'd be standing in a position where no one could ever pull the ground out from under my children again. And when that day came, he would finally understand what he lost. The lease was the first thing I signed, not because it was the biggest step, but because it was symbolic. A 2-bedroom townhome on a quiet street close to the kids' school with a small patch of grass out back where they could play without me worrying about traffic or strangers. When the leasing agent handed me the keys, they felt heavier than metal. They felt like proof. Moving day was messy and loud and beautiful. Friends from work showed up with boxes and pizza. The kids argued over who got which room, their laughter echoing down hallways that finally belonged to us. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them, my chest tight with gratitude. We weren't just housed, we were rooted. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone on the living room floor, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. The silence didn't feel threatening anymore. It felt earned. That's when I noticed the envelope slipped under the door. No return address. My stomach dropped as I picked it up. Inside was a letter, handwritten, familiar handwriting I hadn't seen in years. Tanya, I never meant for it to go this far. I thought I could fix things before you noticed. I didn't expect you to fight back the way you did. I'm struggling now. I just need a chance to explain. I folded the letter slowly, my hand steady. There was a time when those words would have cracked me open, a time when I would have believed him, believed in the version of him that promised safety and partnership. But that man had disappeared long before the money did. I placed the letter back in the envelope and set it in a drawer, not as a threat, not as leverage, as closure. The next week, I made the call, not to him, to a financial advisor recommended through work. We sat across from each other in a bright office, sunlight pouring in through wide windows, and talked about futures instead of recoveries, investments, long-term plans, education funds. She looked at me midway through our conversation and smiled. "You're thinking like someone who plans to stay standing," she said. I smiled back. I am. The kids started settling into their new routines, new friends, new teachers, new normal. One evening, while helping with homework at the kitchen table, my son looked up at me with serious eyes. "Are we poor anymore?" he asked. The question landed harder than I expected. I took a breath. "No," I said honestly, "but more important, we're careful and we take care of each other." He nodded, satisfied. That night, as I tucked them in, I realized something that made my throat tighten. They hadn't asked for their father in weeks. Healing doesn't announce itself. It just shows up one day, fully formed, when you're not looking for it. Later, my phone buzzed with a notification from work, an internal message, an invitation to apply for a leadership development program. Competitive, selective, a path I'd never imagined being offered. I stared at the screen, heart racing, not from fear, but from possibility. Everything in my life had shifted because one man chose to disappear, but every good thing that followed came from one woman choosing not to. I opened my laptop and started the application, because I wasn't done building, not even close. And the life waiting on the other side of this next decision, it would be one my children could look back on and say, she didn't just survive betrayal, she transformed it. And soon, the final piece would fall into place, one that would make sure our story ended not in loss, but in legacy. The leadership program interview was scheduled for a Monday morning. I almost didn't apply, not because I wasn't qualified, but because a small old voice in my head whispered that I was reaching too far, too fast. That voice sounded a lot like the woman I used to be, the one who believed stability was something borrowed from a man, not built by her own hands. I ignored it. The interview panel was made up of 3 people, 2 men, 1 woman, all of them polished, attentive, watching not just what I said, but how I said it. I spoke plainly about logistics, about problem solving, about managing chaos without panicking, because when you've held your children together while everything collapses, deadlines don't scare you. One of them leaned back and asked, "What motivates you?" I didn't hesitate. "Security," I said. "Not just financial, emotional, structural. I know what happens when systems fail people who depend on them. I don't want to be part of that failure." The woman on the panel nodded slowly, like she understood something beyond my resume. I walked out of the room feeling lighter than I had in years. Weeks passed. Life kept moving. School lunches, project deadlines, evening walks through the neighborhood. The kids started talking about summer plans like they trusted the future to exist, and that alone felt like a miracle. Then the call came. "We'd like to offer you a spot in the program," HR said. "It starts next quarter." I sat down hard on the couch, my chest tight. "Thank you," I managed. After I hung up, I didn't scream or cry. I just sat there, hands folded in my lap, letting the weight of it sink in. This wasn't luck. This was trajectory. The program demanded more time, more responsibility, more faith in myself than I'd ever been asked to give before. But I adjusted. I always had. I studied after the kids went to bed, took notes during lunch breaks, asked questions without apologizing for them. And slowly, something changed. People started coming to me for answers. Not sympathy, not backstory, solutions. Then, like a bad habit trying to reassert itself, the past knocked again. I received a formal notice in the mail, thin envelope, heavy meaning. He was requesting a modification, visitation discussions, a chance to rebuild a relationship with the children. I sat at the kitchen table reading the letter twice, my hands steady but my jaw tight. This wasn't about them, it was about control. He had lost money, lost comfort, lost access to my life, and now he wanted a door back in through the one thing he thought would weaken me. I called my attorney that same afternoon. "We'll handle it," she said calmly, "but you need to be prepared. This may get ugly." I stared out the window at the backyard where my kids were laughing, running through fallen leaves, free and unburdened. "I've already been through ugly," I replied. "I'm not afraid of it anymore." That night, after they were asleep, I sat alone with the letter spread out on the table. The man who disappeared with our savings now wanted to reappear on his terms. He still didn't understand. Survival had taught me something power never could. Access is earned. Trust is rebuilt, not demanded. And motherhood had turned me into something far stronger than desperation ever could. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, because the next move wasn't his to make. It was mine. And whatever came next, I was ready to protect everything I had rebuilt, even if it meant standing in front of him one last time and making sure he understood exactly who he was dealing with now. Courtrooms feel different when you're no longer afraid of losing everything. I realized that the moment I walked in for the custody hearing. The smell of old wood and paper didn't make my stomach twist anymore. My hands didn't shake. My heart wasn't racing. I had already survived the worst night of my life, sleeping in a car with 2 children and nothing left to give but reassurance. Nothing in this room could top that. He was already there when I arrived, sitting straighter than last time. New haircut, new jacket, a carefully rehearsed version of responsibility draped over him like a costume. If someone didn't know our history, they might have believed him. I did not. He smiled when he saw me, like we were co-parents navigating a misunderstanding instead of strangers separated by betrayal. "Tanya?" he said softly. I didn't respond. The judge entered. Formalities followed. Papers shuffled. Lawyers spoke in calm, measured tones that tried to turn lived trauma into neutral language. His attorney painted a familiar picture. A father who made mistakes. A man who wanted redemption. A parent seeking reconnection. They never mentioned the emptied accounts, the eviction notice, the nights my children slept hungry while he posted vacation photos. When my attorney stood, she didn't raise her voice. She laid out timelines. She showed records, transfers, screenshots, the fraud investigation, the settlement, the offshore account found under a name tied to our child. The courtroom went very quiet. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing as she read. "Mr. she said finally, "can you explain why you disappeared without contact or support for nearly a year?" He shifted in his seat. "I was overwhelmed," he said. "I didn't think—" "That's clear," the judge replied sharply. "What's unclear is why you believe re-entry is a right rather than a privilege." I felt something loosen in my chest. Then came the moment he didn't expect. The judge turned to me. "Miss Carter," she said, "how have your children been affected by this absence?" I took a breath. Not because I was nervous, because I wanted my words to be exact. "They learned that safety can disappear overnight," I said calmly. "But they also learned that consistency can be rebuilt. I did that, alone." He stared at the table. The judge nodded slowly. "I see a parent who stayed and another who left and returned only when stability was restored." She looked back at him. "This court does not reward abandonment." My heart pounded, not with triumph, but with recognition. Truth had weight here. The judge announced a temporary ruling: supervised visitation only, pending further review. Mandatory counseling, proof of stability, no unsupervised contact. It wasn't the end, but it was a line. Outside the courtroom, he caught up to me in the hallway. "You think you've won," he hissed quietly. "This isn't over." I turned to him slowly. "It ended the day you walked away from your children," I said. "Everything after that is just paperwork." His face twisted with something ugly and desperate. I walked past him without looking back. That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, my daughter asked, "Is he going to take us away?" I knelt beside her, steady and certain. "No," I said, "no one can do that." After they fell asleep, I stood alone in the living room, staring at the closed door, replaying the judge's words in my mind. This wasn't just about custody. It was about finality. And I knew, deep down, that the last chapter was coming, the one where the past would finally lose its grip for good. But first, there was one more decision to be made, one more truth to face, and it would change everything. The morning after the hearing, I woke up lighter. Not because everything was perfect, not because the past had magically disappeared, but because the future was finally mine to protect. I made breakfast while the kids argued over cereal choices, their voices filling the kitchen with a normalcy that once felt impossible. Sunlight streamed through the window, landing on the table where I'd once spread eviction notices and late bills. The same space, a completely different life. That's when it hit me. This house wasn't built on money. It was built on resilience. I dropped the kids at school and sat in the car for a moment afterward, hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing in the quiet. For the first time in years, there was nothing urgent chasing me, no crisis looming, no fear waiting to ambush the next hour. Just clarity. The supervised visitation schedule was posted clearly on paper, boundaries established, safeguards in place. He could no longer show up and disappear at will. He could no longer use chaos as leverage. Control had finally left his hands. At work, my day moved smoothly. Meetings, planning sessions, emails that carried weight. People trusted my judgment. My voice mattered in rooms I once would have been afraid to enter. During lunch, I opened the leadership program materials and wrote one sentence at the top of my notebook: legacy over survival. Because that's what this had become. I wasn't just keeping my head above water anymore. I was teaching my children what strength looks like, what accountability looks like, what walking away with dignity looks like. That evening, after homework and dinner, we sat together on the couch watching a movie. My son rested his head against my arm. My daughter held my hand without thinking about it. Small gestures, huge meaning. They felt safe, and so did I. Later, when the house was quiet, I stood by the window and looked out at the streetlights glowing steadily against the dark. I thought about the woman I had been the day I walked into the bank and saw nothing but zeros, the woman who cried on cold nights in a parked car, the woman who wondered if she'd ever feel whole again. I wanted to tell her something. You're going to make it. Not because someone comes back, not because money returns, but because you refuse to disappear. My husband thought vanishing with our savings would erase me, thought it would break me, thought it would leave me small and silent. Instead, it revealed exactly who I was. A mother who stayed, a woman who learned, a survivor who became a builder. And as I turned off the lights and headed to bed, one truth settled into my bones with certainty. Betrayal does not define the woman who survives it. What she builds afterward does. If you learned something new from my life story, please like this video, subscribe to join our community for more stories like mine, and comment down below where you're watching this video from. I'd truly love to know.